At the beginning of the 17th century, the balance of global power began to change. European nations realized that controlling the world required more than just powerful armies. Control of oceans, trade routes, and overseas territories would become the key to future dominance. England was a small island nation. It did not have the enormous population or resources of countries like France and Spain. However, the English understood one important fact. If they could control the seas, they could expand trade and gradually increase their influence around the world. During the late 16th century, Spain was one of the most powerful empires on Earth. Its massive fleet transported wealth from the Americas back to Europe. But in 1588, the English Navy defeated the Spanish Armada. This event was not only a military victory, it marked the beginning of a new era for England. After this victory, England gained confidence. It realized that a powerful navy could allow the country to compete with the greatest powers of Europe. England began building faster and stronger ships. It improved naval technology, trained skilled sailors, and developed the ability to travel across long distances. At the same time, English merchants began exploring opportunities across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Their original goal was trade and profit, but these commercial connections gradually developed into political influence. The Royal Navy became the foundation of British expansion. It protected trade routes, defended merchant ships, and helped Britain compete against rival European powers. A powerful idea emerged during this period. The nation that controlled the oceans would control global trade. This belief became one of the main foundations of the British Empire. When the British Empire later expanded across continents, its greatest advantage was not only its army or economy, it was its ability to dominate the world's oceans. The expansion of the British Empire did not begin mainly through conquest and war. It started with trade. In the early stages, England's main goal was to establish commercial connections with different parts of the world. British merchants understood that the resources of foreign lands, such as spices, precious metals, textiles, and raw materials, were extremely valuable in European markets. During the 17th century, English traders began reaching the coasts of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. They established small commercial centers known as trading posts. These locations allowed British merchants to exchange goods with local populations and rulers. At first, these trading posts existed only for business purposes. British companies received permission from local authorities to build warehouses, offices, and small forts. They collected valuable products such as spices, tea, silk, sugar, gold, and other resources. However, over time, the situation began to change. To protect their commercial interests, the British started using military power. They placed soldiers near trading centers and gradually became involved in local politics. This transformation was extremely important. Small trading stations slowly became centers of political influence. India became one of the clearest examples of this process. The East India Company originally arrived in India as a trading organization, but later, by taking advantage of political conflicts among local rulers and using military power, it expanded its influence. A similar pattern appeared in other parts of the world. Britain created trading centers along the African coast, established control over Caribbean islands for sugar production, and created permanent settlements in North America. Gradually, British ambitions moved beyond simple trade. They developed a system where colonies became connected to Britain's economy and political power. This created a new form of empire, an empire where trade was the first step, but long-term control was the ultimate goal. One of Britain's greatest strategies was establishing economic influence before seeking political control. This approach helped Britain build one of the largest empires in human history. North America was one of the most important chapters in the expansion of the British Empire. It was the region where Britain established some of its first large-scale permanent colonies. These colonies not only became an important part of Britain's economy, but also created the path for the birth of a future nation. In 1607, the English established their first permanent settlement in North America, Jamestown, Virginia. Although it was a small settlement, it proved that England could create a lasting presence across the Atlantic. The early settlers faced enormous challenges. They struggled with unfamiliar environments, food shortages, diseases, and conflicts with indigenous populations. However, over time, they developed successful communities through farming, trade, and expansion. In Virginia, tobacco farming became extremely profitable. As demand for tobacco increased in Europe, the crop became one of the main economic foundations of the colony. After Virginia, more British colonies were established along the eastern coast of North America. By the 18th century, 13 British colonies had been created. Each colony developed its own economy, society, and political traditions. The New England colonies attracted settlers seeking religious freedom, while the southern colonies depended heavily on agriculture. They produced crops such as tobacco, cotton, and other valuable goods. These colonies became extremely important to Britain. They provided agricultural products, timber, shipbuilding materials, and other resources. They also became a major part of Britain's global trade network. However, the relationship between Britain and the colonies gradually became more complicated. The British government wanted to collect taxes and control colonial trade, while many colonists began demanding greater political rights. In the mid-18th century, Britain and France fought for control of North America. After this conflict, Britain became the dominant European power in the region. But victory came with a cost. Tensions between Britain and the colonies increased, as many settlers believed they were being treated unfairly. These tensions eventually led to the American Declaration of Independence in 1776. After years of war, the United States became an independent nation in 1783. Although Britain lost the 13 American colonies, North America remained a major chapter in British imperial history. The experience shaped Britain's future methods of colonization, trade, and global expansion. If one region played a central role in the economic success of the British Empire, it was the Caribbean. Today, these islands are known for tourism, but during the 17th and 18th centuries, they were among the most profitable agricultural colonies in the world. Above all, sugar production generated enormous wealth for Britain. In 1627, Britain established a permanent settlement on Barbados. Over the following decades, it gained control of islands such as Jamaica, Antigua, St. Kitts, Nevis, and the Bahamas. Their tropical climate and fertile soil made them ideal for growing sugarcane, leading British investors to establish vast sugar plantations. At the same time, the demand for sugar in Europe increased dramatically. Once considered a luxury for the wealthy, sugar gradually became part of everyday life. As the popularity of tea, coffee, chocolate, and sweet foods grew, so did the demand for sugar. Caribbean plantations became one of Britain's richest sources of income. However, this prosperity came at a terrible human cost. The plantations required a huge labor force, and local workers were not enough to meet that demand. As a result, millions of Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic and enslaved on these plantations. They worked under brutal conditions, endured long hours, and faced harsh punishment. A single large plantation often depended on hundreds of enslaved workers. Labor began before sunrise and frequently continued until after sunset. Plantation owners imposed strict discipline to maximize production. Disease, malnutrition, exhaustion, and accidents caused many enslaved people to die at a young age. Despite these conditions, British plantation owners and merchants earned enormous profits. Raw sugar and molasses were shipped to Britain, where they were refined and sold across Europe. The wealth generated from this trade helped finance Britain's industries, banking system, and powerful navy. The Caribbean was more than a group of farming colonies. It became a key part of the Atlantic trading system. British ships regularly sailed between Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean, forming what became known as the triangular trade. Britain was not the only European power in the Caribbean. France, Spain, and the Netherlands also controlled islands in the region, leading to repeated conflicts for dominance. Several islands changed hands multiple times, but by the 18th century, Britain had become one of the dominant powers in the Caribbean. Although the Caribbean sugar economy greatly enriched the British Empire, it also became one of the darkest chapters in its history. The forced enslavement of millions of Africans, the separation of families, and the widespread suffering they endured remain a lasting reminder that imperial wealth often came at an immense human cost. One of the darkest and most painful chapters in the history of the British Empire was the transatlantic slave trade. It was far more than an economic system. It was a brutal enterprise that destroyed the freedom, families, and lives of millions of people. Although Britain was not the only nation involved, it became one of the largest slave trading powers during the 18th century. As the production of sugar, tobacco, cotton, and other plantation crops expanded, colonial landowners demanded an ever-growing labor force. To meet this demand, millions of Africans were forcibly captured, transported, and sold into slavery. Men, women, and children were taken mainly from West and Central Africa. Some were captured during wars or raids, while others were sold by local traders. They were marched to coastal forts, chained together, and loaded onto European slave ships. The voyage across the Atlantic became known as the Middle Passage. It was one of the most horrific journeys in history. Hundreds of people were packed into the cramped lower decks of ships with little food, clean water, or medical care. Disease, starvation, and terrible conditions caused many to die before reaching the Americas. Those who survived were sold in markets across the Caribbean and the Americas. They were forced to work on sugar, cotton, tobacco, and coffee plantations. They had no control over their own lives. Families were separated, children were sold away from their parents, and harsh punishments were common for even the smallest acts of resistance. This entire system formed part of a vast commercial network. manufactured goods were shipped from Europe to Africa, enslaved Africans were transported to the Americas, and plantation products such as sugar, tobacco, and cotton were then shipped back to Europe. This became known as the triangular trade. The profits were enormous. British merchants, ship owners, bankers, and investors accumulated great wealth from this trade. Ports such as Liverpool, Bristol, and London prospered, and some of this wealth helped finance Britain's growing industries during the Industrial Revolution. Over time, however, opposition to slavery increased. Humanitarian campaigners, religious leaders, and reformers exposed the cruelty of the slave trade and worked to change public opinion. In 1807, the British Parliament passed the Slave Trade Act, making the slave trade illegal throughout the British Empire. Slavery itself continued for several more years until the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 abolished slavery across most of the British Empire. Today, the transatlantic slave trade is remembered not only as a major part of British imperial history, but also as one of the greatest human tragedies in world history. It serves as a lasting reminder of the terrible cost of building wealth through exploitation and injustice. Africa was far more than just another continent for the British Empire. It became a vital center for trade, maritime routes, and strategic influence. During the 17th century, Britain's initial objective was not to conquer the entire continent. Instead, it focused on establishing secure trading posts and coastal forts where commerce could be conducted and sea routes protected. Along the coast of West Africa, Britain gradually built forts, warehouses, and trading stations. These installations stored European goods and served as places where British merchants traded with local communities. Many of these forts also functioned as military positions, protecting British interests against rival European powers. At first, British traders purchased gold, ivory, beeswax, timber, pepper, and other valuable natural resources from African markets. Over time, however, the slave trade became an increasingly important part of this commercial system. Some coastal forts were used to detain enslaved Africans before they were transported across the Atlantic to the Caribbean and the Americas. Britain was not the only European power active in Africa. Portugal, Spain, France, and the Netherlands also established trading posts along the African coast. Competition among these powers often led to conflicts over strategic ports and commercial influence. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the situation began to change. The Industrial Revolution increased Europe's demand for raw materials, encouraging European nations to look beyond the coastline and toward the interior of Africa. What had once been primarily a coastal trading network gradually expanded inland. Britain also secured control over several important maritime routes. One of the most significant was the Cape of Good Hope, located at the southern tip of Africa. Before the opening of the Suez Canal, this route was essential for ships traveling between Britain, India, and East Asia. Controlling it strengthened Britain's global trading network. During the 19th century, European involvement in Africa expanded even further. Although much of the large-scale colonial partition occurred later, the foundations of British influence had already been established through these coastal forts and trading centers. Britain often negotiated agreements with local rulers, while in other cases, it relied on military force to protect its commercial interests. Gradually, economic influence evolved into political control, laying the groundwork for future colonial rule. The coastal forts of Africa were more than commercial centers. They became vital links in Britain's global imperial network. Ships traveling between Europe, India, the Caribbean, and the Americas regularly relied on these ports, making Africa an essential part of British economic and naval strategy. At the same time, this history carries a darker legacy. Alongside trade came exploitation, slavery, and growing foreign influence over local societies. The effects of these developments shaped African history for generations and continue to influence many regions today. If there is one organization that transformed from a commercial enterprise into the foundation of an empire, it was the East India Company. Few trading companies in history have ever gained enough power to influence the politics, economy, and military affairs of an entire country. The East India Company was founded on December 31st, 1600, when Queen Elizabeth I granted it a royal charter. This charter gave the company exclusive rights to trade with many regions of Asia. Its original objective was to purchase valuable goods such as spices, silk, cotton textiles, indigo, tea, and other luxury products for European markets. The company's earliest activities in India were purely commercial. It established trading factories and commercial settlements in Surat, Madras, Chennai, Bombay, Mumbai, Kolkata. In this context, the word factory referred to trading stations and warehouses rather than manufacturing plants. At first, the company depended on the permission of local rulers. During the height of the Mughal Empire, it operated under trading agreements granted by the Mughal emperors. India was one of the wealthiest economies in the world, famous for its textiles, silk, spices, and fine craftsmanship. During the 18th century, however, the Mughal Empire began to weaken. Regional powers competed for influence, creating political instability. The East India Company took advantage of these changing conditions. While continuing its commercial activities, it gradually became involved in local politics and military conflicts. To protect its interests, the company built its own army. This force included British officers, as well as large numbers of Indian soldiers known as sepoys. Over time, it became one of the largest private military forces in the world. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 marked a major turning point. Under the leadership of Robert Clive, the company defeated Nawab Siraj-ud-Dowlah of Bengal. This victory allowed the company to gain enormous political and economic influence over one of India's richest provinces. Its position became even stronger after the Battle of Buxar in 1764. In 1765, Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II granted the company the Diwani rights, allowing it to collect revenue from Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This provided the company with direct access to vast financial resources. Gradually, the East India Company evolved from a trading organization into a governing authority. It collected taxes, administered justice, maintained armies, and controlled large territories. It was one of history's most remarkable and controversial examples of a private corporation exercising governmental power. At the same time, criticism of company rule increased. Heavy taxation, economic exploitation, damage to local industries, and administrative corruption generated widespread dissatisfaction. These grievances later contributed to major uprisings across India. The rise of the East India Company transformed not only Indian history, but also the history of the British Empire. It demonstrated how a commercial enterprise could become one of the principal foundations of the world's largest imperial power. From the late 18th century through the 19th century, India became the most important colony of the British Empire. British politicians, merchants, and military leaders often referred to India as the jewel in the crown. This title reflected India's enormous wealth, vast population, and strategic importance. At the time, India was one of the world's largest economic regions. Its fertile farmland, highly skilled textile industry, spices, tea, indigo, silk, and other valuable products were in great demand across Europe. Britain understood that controlling India meant controlling one of the world's most important commercial centers. India also became essential to Britain's Industrial Revolution. Raw materials such as cotton, jute, indigo, and tea were exported to Britain. British factories processed these materials into manufactured goods, many of which were then sold back to India and other overseas markets. India therefore served both as a supplier of raw materials and as a major market for British products. British rule extended beyond trade. New legal systems, courts, and revenue administrations were introduced to strengthen colonial governance. District administrations were organized across much of the country to improve control and tax collection. Although some of these institutions later influenced modern administration, their primary purpose was to support British colonial rule. During the 19th century, Britain invested heavily in India's railway network. Railways made it easier to transport goods from inland regions to ports and allowed troops to move quickly across the subcontinent. Much of India's modern railway system traces its origins to this period. Britain also expanded telegraph lines, postal services, and road networks. These projects improved communication and strengthened imperial administration. However, historians generally agree that these developments were designed primarily to serve Britain's economic and strategic interests. The education system also changed significantly. English language education expanded, and new schools and universities were established. While this created a new educated middle class, it also produced many of the leaders who would later guide India's nationalist movement and struggle for independence. British rule also had serious negative consequences. Many traditional Indian industries declined under competition from British manufactured goods. The famous Indian textile industry suffered greatly, while heavy taxation and administrative failures during periods of famine caused widespread hardship. The Indian Rebellion of 1857, often called the First War of Independence by many historians, became one of the greatest challenges to British authority. After suppressing the uprising, the British government dissolved the rule of the East India Company in 1858 and assumed direct control of India, marking the beginning of the British Raj. Over the following decades, India became central to the British Empire's economy, military, and global influence. Millions of Indian soldiers served alongside British forces in later conflicts, including both world wars. India's resources and manpower were essential to maintaining Britain's position as a global power. For these reasons, India was regarded not merely as another colony, but as the most valuable possession of the British Empire. At the same time, however, the growing desire for self-rule and independence would eventually become one of the greatest challenges to imperial authority. The rise of the British Empire did not occur in isolation. As Britain expanded its trade and colonies across the world, several other European powers were pursuing the same ambitions. The principal rivals were Spain, Portugal, France, and the Netherlands. Their competition extended beyond commerce and developed into military, political, and naval conflicts. During the 15th and 16th centuries, Spain and Portugal had led the age of exploration. Voyages by explorers such as Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan enabled these kingdoms to establish vast overseas empires. When Britain entered global trade, it had to challenge powers that were already well established. In the 17th century, the Dutch Republic also emerged as a major maritime and commercial power. The Dutch East India Company, VOC, became one of the world's most successful trading corporations, dominating much of the spice trade. Britain viewed Dutch commercial success as a direct challenge, leading to the Anglo-Dutch Wars. France, however, became Britain's longest and most formidable rival. The two powers competed for influence in North America, India, the Caribbean, and Africa. Local rulers often found themselves caught in this rivalry, sometimes forming alliances with one European power against another. One of the most significant conflicts of this rivalry was the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. Many historians describe it as the first true global war because fighting took place not only in Europe, but also in North America, India, the Caribbean, and across the world's oceans. Britain emerged from the war with major victories. French influence in North America was greatly reduced, and the East India Company strengthened its position in India. These successes dramatically expanded British global influence and established Britain as the leading colonial power. Victory, however, came at a heavy financial cost. The British government accumulated enormous debts while financing the war. To recover these costs, Parliament imposed new taxes on the American colonies. These policies later contributed to growing colonial unrest and eventually played a significant role in the American Revolution. Control of the seas remained another crucial element of imperial competition. The Royal Navy repeatedly fought the French, Spanish, and Dutch fleets. Naval superiority allowed Britain to move troops, goods, and resources safely across the globe. As a result, maritime power became one of the greatest strengths of the British Empire. This long struggle shaped not only European history, but also the future of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. It influenced which European powers controlled different regions and left lasting effects on languages, legal systems, and political institutions around the world. By the beginning of the 19th century, Britain had gained a clear advantage over its principal rivals. Its naval supremacy, worldwide trade network, and expanding colonial empire made it the most influential global power of its age. Yet with this success came new challenges that would become even more apparent in the next stage of imperial history. When discussing the success of the British Empire, one institution stands above all others: the Royal Navy. Many historians argue that without the Royal Navy, Britain could never have become the largest empire in history. Its command of the oceans was the true foundation of British global power. Britain was an island nation, making its security, trade, and communication heavily dependent on the sea. From an early stage, British leaders understood that without a strong navy, neither the country's economy nor its overseas colonies could survive. During the 17th and 18th centuries, Britain invested heavily in modern warships, naval technology, artillery, and the training of professional sailors. These investments gradually transformed the Royal Navy into the world's most powerful naval force. British ships were not only larger and stronger, but were also supported by superior tactics and discipline. One of the Royal Navy's primary responsibilities was protecting global sea routes. Thousands of ships regularly sailed between Britain, India, Africa, North America, Australia, and the Caribbean, carrying valuable goods, raw materials, soldiers, and government officials. Without secure shipping lanes, the British imperial economy would have been severely disrupted. The Royal Navy also played a major role in suppressing piracy. During the 17th and 18th centuries, pirates threatened shipping throughout the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, and the Caribbean Sea. British naval patrols destroyed pirate bases and made international trade routes considerably safer. Britain's navy was not purely defensive. It was also a powerful offensive weapon. Whenever rival European powers threatened British interests, the Royal Navy imposed naval blockades, intercepted enemy fleets, and disrupted their supply lines. These strategies proved decisive in many major wars. One of its greatest victories came at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. Under the command of Admiral Horatio Nelson, the British fleet defeated the combined French and Spanish navies. This victory prevented Napoleon from launching an invasion of Britain and secured British naval supremacy for more than a century. The Royal Navy also connected Britain's vast empire. Whenever rebellions, wars, or emergencies occurred in distant colonies, troops, weapons, and supplies could be transported quickly across the oceans. This ability allowed Britain to govern territories spread across multiple continents. Beyond warfare, the Royal Navy contributed to exploration, mapping, and scientific discovery. Naval expeditions charted coastlines, explored islands, and improved navigational knowledge, leaving a lasting impact on maritime science and global geography. By the mid-19th century, the phrase "Britannia rules the waves" had become widely recognized. It reflected the reality that no other nation could match Britain's dominance at sea. For this reason, many historians conclude that the real strength of the British Empire did not rest solely in London or its armies. It rested on the oceans, where the Royal Navy maintained Britain's global influence and protected the world's largest empire. One of the defining characteristics of the British Empire was that it rarely began by conquering territories outright. Instead, it typically established commercial relationships first, expanded its economic influence, and only later introduced political and military control. This gradual but carefully planned strategy helped Britain build the largest empire in history. British merchants usually began by establishing trading posts in foreign lands. With the permission of local rulers, they built warehouses, offices, and small forts. Through trade, they accumulated wealth and gradually strengthened their position. At this stage, their main objective was profitable commerce and a permanent presence. Whenever political instability, succession disputes, or conflicts between local rulers emerged, Britain often became involved under the claim of protecting its commercial interests. Sometimes it supported one faction, while at other times it backed another. This involvement steadily increased British political influence. In many cases, military assistance was exchanged for commercial privileges. Those privileges later expanded into administrative authority. As a result, what began as trade slowly evolved into direct political control. The East India Company's rise in India remains the clearest example of this strategy. It began as a trading company, but eventually collected taxes, administered justice, maintained its own army, and governed vast territories. Similar patterns appeared in parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, and other regions of the British Empire. Another important feature of British imperial policy was the principle commonly known as divide and rule. In various colonies, Britain took advantage of political rivalries, ethnic divisions, or conflicts among local rulers to strengthen its own position. Although the policy differed from one region to another, it became one of the best-known characteristics of British colonial administration. Military force alone could not govern such a vast empire. Britain therefore developed extensive administrative systems. It established tax collection, courts, police forces, and local governments, allowing a relatively small number of British officials to administer millions of people. Infrastructure also played an important role. Roads, ports, railways, telegraph lines, and postal systems were built across many colonies. While these projects brought some practical benefits to local populations, their primary purpose was to improve transportation, strengthen military control, and increase economic efficiency for the empire. Economically, the colonies became deeply integrated into Britain's imperial system. Raw materials were exported to Britain, manufactured goods were produced in British factories, and those products were then sold back to colonial markets. This generated enormous wealth for Britain, but often weakened local industries and economies. Over time, however, educated people within the colonies began to develop new political ideas. Concepts such as self-government, national identity, and independence became increasingly influential. Ironically, many future nationalist leaders had received education within the very system established by British rule. Through the combined use of trade, administration, military power, economic integration, and diplomacy, Britain succeeded in controlling vast regions of the world. Yet within this very system, the foundations of the empire's eventual decline were already beginning to emerge. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the British Empire had reached a position that few empires in history had ever achieved. From North America to the Caribbean, from Africa to India, and from Southeast Asia to Australia, the British flag flew across vast regions of the world. What had once been a small island nation became the largest empire the world had ever seen. Britain's rise was not the result of a single factor. It was built upon the combined strength of the Royal Navy, global trade, the Industrial Revolution, efficient administration, advanced financial institutions, and strategic diplomacy. Above all, Britain's command of the world's sea routes gave it an advantage that few rivals could challenge for generations. By the middle of the 19th century, Britain maintained a presence along many of the world's most important maritime routes. Key ports in the Indian Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and Mediterranean Sea supported the movement of goods, soldiers, and information across the empire. As British influence expanded, so did the spread of the English language, elements of British law, parliamentary traditions, educational institutions, and administrative systems. Even today, many countries retain aspects of these institutions as part of their national systems. However, the empire's story is not solely one of expansion and development. It also includes colonialism, economic exploitation, the extraction of resources, cultural influence, and the loss of political independence for many societies. While British rule introduced infrastructure and administrative reforms in some regions, it also profoundly affected local economies, traditions, and political freedoms. Over time, nationalist movements emerged across many colonies. Educated communities increasingly demanded self-government, democracy, and independence. These growing movements would eventually become the greatest challenge to British imperial rule. Meanwhile, new global powers such as Germany and the United States were rising rapidly through industrial and economic growth. International competition became increasingly intense, making it more difficult for any empire to maintain global dominance indefinitely. Nevertheless, by the late 19th century, the British Empire remained the largest empire in the world. At its height, it controlled or influenced nearly 1/4 of the Earth's land surface and about 1/4 of the world's population. This extraordinary reach gave rise to the famous saying, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." The phrase reflected the fact that somewhere within the empire, the sun was always shining on British territory. Yet, like every great empire in history, Britain's greatest expansion was followed by the beginning of its decline. 2 world wars, independence movements, economic pressures, and a changing international order would gradually weaken the foundations of the empire. Today we explored how the British Empire expanded its commercial, military, and political influence across the world. From small trading posts to the largest empire in history, its rise was remarkable, complex, and deeply controversial. It was a story of naval power, industrial growth, and strategic governance, but also of colonialism, exploitation, and profound human suffering. The empire's most dramatic chapter, however, is still ahead. In Part 3, we'll examine the Great Wars, World War I, World War II, the rise of independence movements, and the gradual decline of the British Empire. Thank you for watching, and don't miss the final episode.